Imagine walking up to your front door, expecting comfort, and realizing your family has locked you out without warning. No call, no confrontation, just a changed lock and a note telling you to learn consequences. That's what happened to me. My name is Patricia, and this is the story of how I went from silently funding my family's lifestyle to being branded as ungrateful the moment I asked for boundaries. It's a story about betrayal wrapped in tradition and the emotional cost of trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. Stick with me, because by the end, the very people who cast me out will walk into a home they thought I'd lost, only to realize I now own it. It was a Thursday. An ordinary Thursday, I thought. I just wrapped a long freelance shoot across town, camera still slung over my shoulder and fingers frozen from the wind. All I wanted was a hot shower and silence. Instead, I stood at my own front door, confused and increasingly cold, jiggling a key that no longer fit the lock. At first, I thought I'd grabbed the wrong one. I even chuckled to myself, half from embarrassment, half from exhaustion. But no, it was my key. The same one I'd used every day for the past 5 years. The deadbolt had been changed. And then I saw it. A folded piece of paper taped under the welcome mat, like some passive-aggressive treasure map. My name was written on it in my mother's tidy cursive, as if this were some polite invitation to brunch. You need a reality check. This influencer fantasy has gone too far. Actions have consequences, Patricia. It's time you learned that. I don't remember how long I stood there, the letter trembling in my hands. I read it again, and again, trying to make sense of how my parents, my own parents, had orchestrated an ambush so cold, it made the November wind seem kind. This wasn't just a lock, it was a message, a punishment, and I knew exactly what it was about. See, my name's Patricia Ellery. I'm 32, a full-time content producer, writer, and ghostwriter, though to my parents, I may as well be unemployed with hobbies. I make my living online, writing speeches for politicians, scripts for YouTubers who'd never credit me, and coaching public figures on how to sound human. It's not glamorous, but it's mine, and it pays the bills, including theirs. Or it used to. I've always been the reliable one, the quiet achiever, the one who never needed reminding to send the check when the mortgage was due, or when my younger brother Kevin's car note needed covering. I let them guilt me into staying in the family home far longer than I should have, calling it teamwork, even though the team never played fair. And I didn't complain. I didn't make a fuss, until last month when I hinted that I might, just might, scale back the support, not as revenge, not out of anger, but because I was finally starting to understand the difference between helping and being held hostage by obligation. Apparently, that was enough to warrant exile. Standing there that evening, I realized something sharp. My parents had been waiting for the perfect moment to punish me for choosing independence over compliance. And locking me out? That was their opening act. They didn't even call, didn't wait for a conversation. They just changed the locks and left a note like I was a misbehaving teenager needing discipline. Like I wasn't the one who paid half the utility bills last winter. Like I hadn't spent 3 years putting their needs before my own. I'm not dramatic, I swear. But that night, sitting on the porch with my camera bag and dignity at my feet, something snapped in me. Not loudly, not with fury, but with the kind of quiet finality that only betrayal brings. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I sat there, staring at the door I'd once called home and made a decision. I wouldn't beg to be let back in. I'd find a new place. Not just a new apartment, but a new emotional address. One where love didn't come with strings. Where silence wasn't the price of inclusion. Where self-worth didn't have to be traded for approval. Because if this was what family meant, conditional love, calculated punishment, then maybe it was time I redefined the word altogether. What would you do if your own parents locked you out to teach you a lesson? Would you knock again? Or would you finally walk away? Stick around, because this is just the beginning. You won't believe what happened next. I stared at the note again in the dim light of my car's dashboard, as if rereading it might change its contents. You need a reality check. This influencer fantasy has gone too far. Actions have consequences, Patricia. It's time you learned that. They didn't even bother to sign it. Just that cold, clipped handwriting, my mother's. And the part that stung most wasn't the insult. It was the calculated phrasing, like they'd rehearsed it, like it wasn't even about disappointment or worry. Just control? Reality check? I've worked 15-hour days, building my freelance writing business from scratch. I've pitched to strangers, rewritten political speeches overnight, edited novels without credit, and navigated the pressure of clients who expected me to ghostwrite their authenticity. I might not be on a magazine cover, but I pay my bills. And theirs. Fantasy? No. The fantasy was thinking I could succeed in a way they didn't understand and still be respected for it. As I sat in my car, parked right outside the home I had been paying into, I realized what this really was. Not a misunderstanding. Not a misguided attempt to get through to me. This was punishment. They hated that I made a living online. They hated that I didn't wear a name badge or clock into an office. My work wasn't real to them unless they could explain it at a dinner party. When I first told them I was leaving the agency to freelance full-time, they looked like I'd announced I was joining the circus. "You'll come back when it doesn't work out," my dad said casually, sipping his coffee, like I was off on some little detour before real adulthood started. And when the money did start coming in, when I paid off their overdue phone bill without a word, they didn't say thank you. They said nothing at all. As if silence would keep them in control. As if acknowledging my success would somehow weaken theirs. So now, they'd chosen this. A note taped under the mat like a trap. A changed lock. No warning, no conversation. Just exile. It's strange how quickly grief and clarity can arrive in the same breath. Because as I reread the words, "It's time you learned consequences," I understood something gut deep. They didn't want me to fail. They expected me to fail. They'd been waiting for it, just biding their time until I stumbled, so they could say, "We told you so." But I hadn't stumbled, and that was the problem. Because somewhere along the way, the support they gave, if they ever did, turned into a quiet resentment that I didn't play by their rules, that I built a career without asking for permission, that I didn't owe them my obedience. And now they'd manufactured a consequence, one they could feel justified in, a way to regain power under the banner of parenting. But I wasn't a teenager coming home past curfew. I was a grown woman being locked out of a home I'd helped sustain, all because my version of success didn't come with a corner office or a 401k. I wanted to scream, to call them, to ask, "Do you really think this will make me come crawling back?" But I didn't. Instead, I drove across town in silence, tears hot behind my eyes, not because I felt weak, but because I felt humiliated. They didn't even give me the dignity of a conversation. Just a note, like I was a mistake they were correcting. My friend Sienna took me in that night without question. She handed me a glass of wine, pushed her cat off the couch cushion, and said, "They're lucky it's not me you're dealing with. I'd have changed their locks." I laughed, because it was either that or cry harder. That night, curled up under an unfamiliar throw blanket, I lay awake thinking about every little time I let things slide. When Kevin needed new tires. When Dad said the Wi-Fi bill bounced again. When Mom asked me to quietly cover a dental copay so she wouldn't stress him out. I covered it all. No questions. No complaints. And this was my thank you. Not a conversation, not a warning, just silence, a locked door, and a note. But what they didn't realize was, I had learned a lesson. Not the one they intended. I learned that love with conditions isn't love at all. That sometimes, the ones who should protect your peace are the ones who resent it most. So I didn't call them. Not that night, not the next morning. Instead, I found a new apartment, and I made one small but powerful promise to myself. If they wanted consequences, they were about to experience mine. I didn't make some grand announcement. I simply, "We're frying," stopped. No more quiet Venmo transfers to cover this month's gap. No more sneaky Zelle deposits into Dad's account when the electric bill notice came as a surprise. No more pretending I didn't notice that Kevin's car insurance, under my name, was being automatically deducted every month without a thank you. I logged into every shared account I was linked to and slowly, methodically removed myself. I canceled auto payments, changed passwords, revoked my authorization. And then I called the power company, the internet provider, the insurance agency. Hi, I'm removing myself as the responsible party. Yes, I understand the consequences. No, I'm not available for future payments. It was the quietest rebellion I've ever staged. No fireworks. Just freedom. I didn't tell them ahead of time. Why should I? They hadn't told me they were changing the locks. At first, there was silence. A day passed. Then 2. I pictured them checking their banking apps, furrowing brows, wondering why the water bill hadn't been paid yet. Maybe they assumed it was a glitch. Maybe they thought I'd forgot. But on day 4, the calls started. Blocked. Then came the email. Subject line: "We need to talk." The body was curt. "Patricia, we've noticed you haven't covered your part of the household expenses this month. We understand you're upset, but this is a family. Everyone contributes. It's not right to punish the rest of us because you're going through a difficult phase." Love mom difficult phase? I almost laughed. Was that what they were calling full-scale emotional eviction these days? Still, I didn't respond. I wasn't interested in negotiating with people who saw my silence as currency and my success as threat. But I knew the next phase would come. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, the guilt turned to rage. Kevin was the first to blow up my phone. 5 missed calls, 2 voicemails, the last one loud enough to hear without pressing play. "Pat, this isn't funny. Mom and Dad are freaking out. I've got payments coming up, and they're acting like it's my fault. You've always helped out. What happened to having each other's backs? What happened? I happened. I happened to remember that I'm not a walking wallet. I happened to realize that Kevin, my younger brother, who hadn't held down a job for more than 6 months at a time, was 30 and still acting like life owed him a grace period. He once told me with a straight face that he was between passions when he left the dealership. Passions. Meanwhile, I was ghostwriting 6 articles a week and editing 2 podcasts just to make rent, and still handing over enough money to cover his unpaid car registration. I used to think helping them made me a good daughter, but it didn't. It just made me easy. What really made my blood boil was a message forwarded to me by mistake. One my mother meant to send to Kevin, but it ended up in our old group chat. "Don't worry about Patricia. She's just trying to make a point. She'll come around when her little ego trip ends." Little ego trip. It took everything in me not to respond. Instead, I screenshotted it and saved it in a folder I'd started called Proof. Not for legal reasons, just for clarity, my own. Because this wasn't confusion. It wasn't a lapse in communication, it was strategy. They had never seen my support as generosity, only obligation. Something owed, something expected, something due. The idea that I might prioritize my own life was baffling to them, offensive even. Kevin sent one more message that week. "This is ridiculous. You're hurting all of us because you got your feelings hurt. Grow up, Pat. You're not the only one struggling." No, I wasn't. But I was the only one being used for pretending I wasn't. I didn't reply. Instead, I made one last call that night, an accountant I'd been too proud to reach out to for months. A woman named Jordan, referred to me by a fellow freelancer. She was calm, direct, and clear. "You need to separate your finances completely," she said, not unkindly. "It sounds like they've been braided into yours for far too long." So we started the process. New business accounts, new tax setup, no more shared logins, no more guilt-fueled withdrawals. Just me. For me. It felt lonely at first, but also clean. And as I went to sleep that night, I realized something heartbreaking. They weren't angry that I was distant. They were angry they'd lost their access. Access to my money. Access to my loyalty. Access to the daughter who never said no. Well, they finally got a no, and it came without apology. I didn't find out Kevin lost his job until nearly 2 weeks after it happened. And not from him. It came up in the most absurd way. A friend of mine, Lila, who worked in HR at a nearby dealership, casually asked over lunch, "Hey, didn't your brother used to work at Morris Auto?" Used to. Just those 2 words turned my stomach. I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, why?" She paused, chewing slowly. "Oh, I heard they let someone go over there." Kevin Ellery. That's your brother, right? I nodded, the knot in my chest tightening. When was this? Few weeks ago, I think. Right after the fall promotion flopped. I blinked. Few weeks. Not days. He hadn't told me? Hadn't told anyone, as far as I knew. And now it made sense. His vague texts, the midday Instagram stories from sports bars, the way my mom's emails had shifted tone again. Less about morality, more about money. That night, I checked Kevin's social media, something I hadn't done in months. I wish I could say I was surprised, but deep down, I wasn't. There he was, tagged at a brewery on a Wednesday afternoon, smiling wide with a flight of IPAs in front of him. The caption read, "You can't spell reset without rest." 2 days later, another post, this time from a sneaker boutique downtown. Sometimes you gotta treat yourself. Work hard, look good. Work hard, he didn't even have a job. And then the one that really hit a nerve, a screenshot of a DoorDash receipt. $46 for wings, fries, and a milkshake, delivered at 11:53 a.m. before noon. It wasn't just the spending. It was the casual entitlement, the smugness of someone who believed the safety net would always be there, because it always had been. I watched it unfold in real time, the slow motion unraveling of a man who'd never had to clean up his own mess. My mother, of course, had an entirely different spin. "He's under a lot of pressure right now," she told me in a voicemail that somehow managed to sound both urgent and passive-aggressive. "He's looking. He just needs time." I didn't respond. Because here's the thing no one in my family seemed willing to admit. Kevin was never taught how to land on his feet because he was never allowed to fall. Every stumble was padded. Every failure explained away. Did he mess up a sale at the dealership? The economy's tough. Did he oversleep for a shift? He's a night owl. Was he chronically behind on bills? He's young. He's figuring it out. Except he wasn't young anymore. And he wasn't figuring anything out. He was spending what little savings he had left on temporary comforts and ego-preserving distractions, while my parents tiptoed around the mess like it might evaporate if ignored long enough. And worst of all, they still expected me to be the cleanup crew. Another email came that week, from my dad this time. "We haven't heard from you in a while. Things are a bit tight at home. Just wanted to let you know your brother's going through a rough patch. We're doing our best to keep up, but any help would be appreciated." That word again. Help. It used to mean something. Now it just meant handout, from someone they no longer even considered part of the house, let alone the family. I didn't write back. I didn't explain, or defend, or soften the blow. Because the truth was, I had done enough. I had paid enough. I had bent and bent until my spine cracked under the weight of their expectations. And Kevin? He wasn't collapsing. He was coasting. On memories of the sister who used to fix everything. On the blind faith that mom and dad would find a way. On the fantasy that responsibility was optional, as long as he smiled enough and blamed the market. He didn't need a job, he needed accountability. But that wasn't something I could give him, not anymore. And as I sat on my apartment floor that Friday night, eating leftover pasta, budgeting my next contract income, and listening to my neighbors argue through the wall, I felt a surprising calm wash over me. I wasn't the villain. I wasn't the one who'd failed anyone. I was just the first one in the family, brave enough to say, "I won't carry this anymore." The first envelope arrived at my apartment by mistake. Forwarded from the old house, yellow sticker slapped over the original address in crooked ink. I almost didn't open it. But when I did, when I saw "Final Notice, Mortgage Payment Delinquent" in bold type at the top, I didn't feel shock. I felt confirmation. They were sinking, quietly. And they'd hoped I wouldn't notice until I was already roped back in. I stared at the balance past due, 4 figures. Not massive, but heavy. Heavy enough that I could practically feel my mother's panicked breathing, my father's silence, and Kevin's total detachment. I set the letter aside without touching my phone, not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much. Because the version of me they remembered would have reacted instantly, would have rushed in to fix it, pay it off, smooth it over. But I was no longer that version. That Patricia lived back in the house with the mismatched locks and the emotional IOUs. 2 days later, they showed up. No warning, no text, just knock, 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 like nothing had happened. Through the peephole, I saw my mother first, hair carefully set, coat too formal for the weather, mouth pressed into a worried line. Beside her stood my father, arms folded, holding a white envelope. I could already guess what was inside. I opened the door, but not all the way. "Hi," I said flatly. My mother stepped forward as if to hug me, but I didn't move. She caught herself mid-motion, letting her hands drop. "We didn't know how else to reach you," she began, as if the issue was communication, not consequence. "You could have called," I said, "or apologized." She ignored that. My father shifted, uncomfortable. "I suppose you saw the letter," he said. "Yeah, tough situation," I replied. No inflection. Mom inhaled sharply. "Patricia, we need your help. The house is in jeopardy. We're behind 2 months, and the bank's not exactly understanding." Okay, she repeated, confused. "I understand the situation," I clarified, "but I'm not stepping in." A pause. Then came the performance. Her voice softened. "Honey, we're your parents. This is your home too. We built our life there together. Don't you care about that?" "I care," I said, "but I also care about not being manipulated." Her expression hardened, like snapped elastic. "Manipulated? You locked me out. You changed the locks. You left a note telling me I needed a reality check. And now that reality's knocking on your door, suddenly I'm family again?" She blinked. My father looked down at the envelope in his hand. "We made mistakes," he said quietly, "but you've always been the one who holds things together. You're so strong, Trish. We just need help, that's all." And then she said it. "You say you love us," my mother said, voice trembling. "So prove it." My breath caught in my throat. "Prove it." I looked at her, really looked. At the woman who used to braid my hair before school, who cried at my college graduation, who now stood at my door asking me to rescue her pride wrapped in a mortgage. "Love isn't a transaction," I said, barely above a whisper. "It's not something you barter when you run out of other options." She opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't done. "I've paid for Kevin's car, his insurance, your bills. I've kept that house afloat longer than you realize, but I'm done paying to be loved. And still, she tried one last card. Do you really want to be the daughter who let her parents lose their home?" "No," I said, stepping back into my apartment. "I want to be the daughter who finally stopped being your safety net and became her own." I closed the door. Their muffled voices faded behind it, replaced by my heartbeat. I didn't cry. Not this time. Because there's something strangely powerful about the moment you realize the price of being loved isn't supposed to be everything you have. I almost missed the envelope. It was wedged between a furniture catalog and a local pizza coupon in my mailbox. Plain white, no return address, sealed neatly but slightly crooked, like someone had rushed to close it with trembling hands. At first, I assumed it was junk, a political flyer maybe, but then I noticed the handwriting on the front. Not typed, not formal, just 4 words in black ink. "To Patricia, from family." I stood in the hallway of my apartment building for a moment, letting the cold air from the stairwell touch the back of my neck. A part of me already knew this wasn't going to be kind. Still, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, torn at the edge like it had been ripped from a notebook. No salutation, no signature. Just one line. "Family never forgets betrayal." That was it. No context, no accusation. Just that single loaded sentence, short enough to be a whisper, sharp enough to be a blade. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. It's strange how quickly your brain can go from calm to defensive. My fingers tingled, my vision narrowed. I glanced behind me, suddenly unsure who had been watching, who had dropped it, who might still be near. I backed into my apartment, locking the door automatically behind me. I read it again under the kitchen light. Family never forgets betrayal. It was the kind of phrase that could have lived in a mob movie, not a suburban family drama. But here it was, written in shaky cursive, familiar enough that I could imagine 6 people in my family using it. Was it Kevin? Petty retaliation for drying up the money fountain? My mother, still clinging to control through guilt? Or someone more distant, echoing a story they'd only heard her version of? I didn't know, and that made it worse. What disturbed me most wasn't the note itself. It was how casual it was, as if this kind of manipulation came second nature, as if tying betrayal to independence was perfectly normal. But I wasn't naive anymore. This wasn't about love. This was about punishment. Because I hadn't broken a rule. I'd broken a role. And the role they'd cast me in, provider, peacemaker, silent supporter, wasn't mine anymore. I folded the note slowly and slid it into the drawer with the mortgage notice and my mother's last handwritten plea, a quiet archive of emotional warfare. Then I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the edge of my bed and stared at the closed door. I won't lie, I felt a chill that didn't come from the weather. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about perception. To them, my refusal to cave wasn't just defiance. It was treason, because in families like mine, boundaries are betrayal and silence is loyalty. And I had chosen to speak. But I wasn't going to shrink. Not now. Instead, I took out my journal and began writing down every strange moment over the last few weeks. Every missed call. Every unexpected knock. Every name that might have passed that envelope through the mail slot. Because I wasn't afraid. I was prepared. Let them see me as a threat. Let them weaponize nostalgia and family dinners and phrases like, "after all we've done for you." Because if their love came with surveillance and secrets, then it was never love to begin with. And one thing was certain, they might not forget. But neither would I. It started with a tag I didn't recognize. I was halfway through editing a script for a well-known lifestyle creator, a client who demanded anonymity, as they all did, when my phone buzzed again. Another tag. Another ping. Another comment. Wait, is this the ghostwriter behind those fake feminism speeches? Is that Patricia Wrights even real or just a paid mouthpiece for influencers? My stomach dropped. I opened Twitter. My name wasn't trending, thank God. But it was buried under a niche drama thread gaining traction by the hour. Someone had published a thread titled, "The Hidden Hands Behind Your Favorite Online Empowerment Brands." And there I was. Not front and center, but mentioned. A screenshot of an invoice, partially blurred, showed P. Ellery Consulting, listed as a narrative editor for a campaign I'd written 6 months ago. The creator who had hired me had since pivoted to an anti-consumerism rebrand and apparently wanted to bury her old rah-rah girl boss past. And I was now the scapegoat. I hadn't broken any NDAs, I hadn't leaked anything, but the internet doesn't always wait for facts. By noon, my inbox was a minefield. 2 clients asked to pause upcoming projects. 1 canceled entirely. The irony was sharp. For years, I'd been invisible by design, a ghost behind their glow-ups, a quiet architect of their speeches, bios, captions. Now that same invisibility was being used against me. It wasn't a full-blown scandal, just enough controversy to sting. Enough to cast shadows on my credibility. Enough to make me wonder, had I made a mistake going public with my work at all? I'd always danced on the edge, never naming clients, but still maintaining a portfolio under my name. It was my way of taking ownership without burning bridges. But now, that edge cut both ways. I stared at my screen, watching the shares rise, watching my name twist through strangers' fingers. One tweet read, "Funny how all these empowerment gurus outsource their beliefs to ghostwriters. Are we even being inspired by real people anymore?" I didn't want to cry. I really didn't. But this was personal. Not because it threatened my income, though it might, but because it attacked the very thing I'd built from nothing. My words, my integrity. And for a fleeting second, I heard my mother's voice echo in the back of my mind. "It's not a real job, Patricia. At some point, the internet will move on." I'd spent years proving her wrong. And now here I was, sitting alone in my apartment, wondering if she'd been a little bit right after all. But then, something unexpected happened. An email popped up. Subject line, "This is nonsense. I've got your back." It was from Michael Langley. I stared at it, stunned. Michael was a fellow freelancer, a quiet, brilliant writer I'd collaborated with once during a rushed campaign for a wellness brand. He was never flashy, always respectful, and terrifyingly good with words. We hadn't spoken in months. I opened the email. "Hey Patricia, I saw what's happening. I know exactly who's behind this smear. And I've already posted a full breakdown with receipts on my thread. That invoice they shared? Selectively cropped. I have the full version from when we collaborated. Your role was strictly editorial, nothing more. Let me know if you want me to take anything down. But I won't let them drag your name without context. Not on my watch." I clicked the link he included. His post was articulate, calm, and devastating in its accuracy. It had already gathered supportive replies from other freelancers, clients, and even a few micro-influencers I'd worked with anonymously. One reply in particular stopped me cold. "Worked with Patricia once. Class act. Took my scattered notes and made them sing. If she's the villain in this story, the story's broken." I exhaled slowly. Was it over? No, not quite. But something had shifted. I was no longer invisible. And strangely, I didn't want to be. I didn't expect the world to stop spinning just because someone believed me. But that night, it felt like it slowed down. Michael's thread, measured, articulate, meticulous, didn't just clear my name. It framed the whole conversation differently. He didn't rush to defend me like some angry keyboard warrior. He walked the audience through the truth. Receipt by receipt, timestamp by timestamp. He let the facts speak. And then he let his respect for my work ring louder than the noise. "If we're going to talk about ghostwriting," he wrote, "let's talk about the ethical kind. The work that gives shape to someone else's story without stealing it. That's what Patricia does." And then, almost as an afterthought, "She's one of the few writers I'd trust to touch my words." That sentence, it did something to me. I hadn't realized how desperately I'd needed someone to say out loud what I'd been trying to prove silently for years, that my work wasn't a trick or a shortcut. It was craft. It was structure. It was soul. I'd been everyone's invisible asset, and Michael, he made me visible again, without demanding anything in return. The DMs started rolling in the next morning. Not angry ones this time. Supportive. Writers, editors, even a few of the influencers I'd once propped up behind the curtain. "Sorry you got dragged into that. You're one of the good ones. Hey, I saw what happened. If you ever want to collaborate, I'd be honored." And then one that made me stop mid-sip of my coffee. "I was silent when they tagged your name. I won't be silent anymore. You saved my brand. Thank you." It didn't undo the smear campaign, not entirely. But it was enough. Enough to start reclaiming what had been mine all along. By midweek, 2 of the clients who'd paused projects quietly returned to my inbox. Apologies. Excuses. We just needed to assess our brand position during the heat. I let their messages sit unanswered for a day longer than I normally would. Not to be petty, just to remember that I had the power to choose now. I wasn't scrambling to prove I deserved their trust. They were scrambling to re-earn mine. That evening, I sent Michael a thank you note. Just a simple email. "I saw what you wrote. I didn't expect it. I didn't know I needed it until I read it, but I do. Thank you for seeing me as more than just the person behind the words." His reply came 15 minutes later. "I've always seen you, Patricia, even before this mess. Even when you edited that chaotic supplement launch script in 12 hours and made it sound like poetry. You think your strength is in staying quiet. But sometimes, your silence hides a voice the world needs. If you ever want to co-write something that's yours, not ghosted, not hidden, I'd be honored." I stared at the screen, heart thudding quietly. In all the noise of the last few months, being locked out, being guilted, being threatened, I hadn't realized how deeply I'd buried my own creative voice under layers of utility. I'd become a fixer, a lifeline, a writer for hire. But maybe I was also something else, someone with something to say. I looked around my apartment, at the now faded threat note tucked inside a drawer, at the unopened letters that still came from my mother once a week. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel boxed in by them. I felt beyond them. Michael had reminded me of something my family had tried to strip away, that my voice had value even when no one was clapping, especially then. The listing went live on a Tuesday morning. There it was, our old family home. A wide-angle photo of the porch I used to sit on during summer storms, the crumbling brick steps, the bent mailbox still missing its flag, foreclosed, bank-owned, as is. It should have gutted me. Instead, it felt inevitable. The default notices had stopped arriving, which I now realized only meant They'd been swallowed whole by the foreclosure process. My parents hadn't said a word, not even when the house was listed on a public database. Maybe they assumed I wouldn't notice. Maybe they hoped I would. But I did notice. And I did more than that. That afternoon, I opened a new account, set up an LLC. Quiet name, no ties to me. Just initials and numbers and legal distance. The next morning, I made the call. "Hi, I'm interested in 246 Weiler Lane," I told the agent. "I'd like to place a cash offer under my business entity." It wasn't a power move. It was a quiet one. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want them to find out I'd swooped in, triumphant. I didn't need a scene where they realized I now owned the deed to every memory they'd tried to weaponize. I just wanted peace. And strangely, I wanted to restore it. Not the family, not the past, but the house. The place where I used to trace rain patterns on the window with my finger. The kitchen, where Mom taught me how to stir pancake batter. Just enough. The closet under the stairs where I used to hide my poetry notebooks when I didn't want Kevin snooping. That house had been mine long before they ever demanded I pay for it. So I bought it, in silence, under a name they'd never recognize. The process took 3 weeks. The paperwork was clean, no liens, just dust and echoes. When I finally got the keys, I drove over alone. The lawn was overgrown, the siding grayer than I remembered, but the door, scratched, paint chipped, stubborn, opened with a familiar groan. I stepped inside, and time folded in on itself. The hallway still had that faint smell of cedar. The living room, now hollow, echoed with every footstep. I stood in the middle of what used to be our family room and closed my eyes. I expected sorrow, regret. What I felt instead was clarity. I wasn't here to reclaim anything. I was here to release it. I spent the next 2 weekends quietly renovating, hired a local team, kept my name off every invoice. I didn't change much, just enough to breathe life back into it. New curtains, fresh paint, scrubbed floors. I didn't erase the past. I just made space for something new. And all the while, not one person in my family knew. Not Kevin, not Mom, not even Dad. To them, the house was gone. Another casualty of circumstance. To me, it was something else entirely. Proof that I could return, not as a daughter seeking approval, but as a woman reclaiming her power with zero need for permission. Sometimes closure doesn't come through confrontation. Sometimes it arrives on silent feet, carrying keys in one hand and peace in the other. I didn't send them an invitation. The housewarming was meant to be a quiet evening. Some new friends from my co-working circle, Michael, a couple of neighbors, and Maya, of course, who walked in like she owned the place and immediately started lighting scented candles. But somehow, they showed up anyway. My mother first, then my father, and finally Kevin, with that permanently bored expression he wears like armor. They arrived 30 minutes into the party, dressed too stiff for the occasion, eyes already scanning the room like they were evaluating damage. I saw the moment recognition hit them. Their footsteps slowed as they stepped through the threshold. Their eyes caught on the archway, freshly painted in its original soft cream. On the window seat, now refitted with the same cushions my mom once picked out 2 decades ago. They were standing in the living room of the house they lost, now warm with soft lighting, soft laughter, and people who weren't afraid to look me in the eye. Kevin was the first to speak. "This is our house." I smiled calmly and sipped my drink. "It was," I said. "Now it's mine." Silence fell between us, loud and clumsy. My mother's gaze flicked over the fireplace mantel, where a single frame rested, a photo of me at 16, holding a first-place writing trophy she never came to see. I saw her swallow hard. "This is impossible," she said finally, her voice thinner than I remembered. "You couldn't have afforded it?" I offered gently. I used a business pseudonym. The bank accepted the offer within days. My father shifted uncomfortably. "You went behind our backs." "I didn't need your permission," I replied, still calm. "Not anymore." That was when the truth started to seep in. Not just that the house was mine, but that they were guests now. Visitors to a place they never imagined I could hold without them. My mother's tone, turned brittle. So this whole event was, what? A stunt? A chance to gloat? No, I said. A beginning. Mine. You just happened to walk in. Maya wandered over with a refill and leaned in, whispering, "Want me to kick them out?" I brought my "don't mess with my girl" earrings. I grinned, shaking my head. Let them see. Let them feel what they built and what they abandoned. Kevin stood at the base of the stairs, staring up like he expected to see his childhood room untouched. He didn't know I'd turned it into a creative studio, not for clients. For me, my mother tried to recover some ground. You could have told us. We would have come around, helped. Maybe if you hadn't shut us out. You locked me out, I said softly. I just took the hint. They didn't reply, not because they couldn't, but because there was nothing left to argue. Behind them, the sound of clinking glasses and soft music filled the space. No one in that room knew the full weight of the moment, but they didn't need to. They saw a woman who stood her ground, who didn't just survive betrayal, she renovated it. They expected to find me broken down, bitter. Instead, they found me thriving in the very place they left behind. And that, more than anything, undid them. The room was still, the kind of silence that doesn't ask for permission, just arrives and waits for someone to fill it. I stood near the fireplace, one hand resting lightly on the mantel, the other holding the worn brass keys to the front door. The keys I had just changed 2 months ago. The ones they used to think belonged to them. My mother sat rigid on the couch, her lips pressed into a fine line. My father remained near the door, as if unsure whether to step in or escape. Kevin had taken up space by the dining room window, arms folded, gaze pointedly avoiding mine. They had stayed long past the polite end of the party. Everyone else had gone. Even Michael, who lingered by the stairs before I gave him a look, soft, certain, that said, "I need to do this alone." So it was just us. The original 4, but I wasn't their daughter anymore, not in the way they understood that word. That version of me had been stripped away by notes under welcome mats, by silent expectations, by years of emotional debt I was no longer willing to pay. "I know what you're hoping," I began, voice steady, "that this house, this night, this version of me means I'm ready to let things go, move past it, pretend it didn't happen." No one responded. I looked directly at my mother. "You want reconciliation, but you haven't offered repair. You're waiting for forgiveness I was never even asked for." Her eyes darted away. I turned to Kevin. "You're furious I stopped paying for your life, but you never once asked how I was managing mine." To my father. "And you didn't stop them from locking me out, you called it parenting." The silence thickened. I took a breath. "I'm not here to shame you," I continued. "I'm here to tell you what I've learned, what you taught me, even if you didn't mean to." I stepped forward, holding up the keys. "You taught me that loyalty, when demanded, not earned, is just control in disguise. You taught me that inherited love doesn't mean unconditional support. And you taught me that sometimes the hardest freedom is choosing your own peace over inherited pain." I placed the keys gently on the table. "This house is just wood and walls. I didn't buy it to reclaim the past. I bought it to close the door on it." My mother's voice cracked. Finally, "But we're your family." I nodded. "Yes, and I'll always wish that had meant more." Kevin scoffed softly. "You think you're above all this now?" "No," I said, meeting his eyes. "I think I finally understand all this now." They didn't argue again, because what could they say to a woman who had already walked away once, and now wasn't just walking, but choosing not to look back? I turned toward the door. Michael waited outside, leaning against the railing, eyes kind and steady. As I stepped out into the night, I felt the final severance settle not like a wound, but a release. Because this wasn't revenge, it wasn't punishment, it was a declaration that my love would never again be something I had to prove through sacrifice. That respect was something I chose, not something I owed. That walking out didn't mean weakness, it meant finally knowing the door had always been mine to close. Have you ever had to let go of people who couldn't respect your boundaries, even when you still loved them? Let me know below, because sometimes the bravest thing we do is put down the keys and walk out with nothing but our dignity. Thank you for staying with Patricia's journey. She isn't just a character, she's all of us, learning that peace isn't given, it's claimed.